pentagram dedicated to Henry Foreman. In the years of the primal force and the dawn of terrestrial birth,
Ave Satan, Ave Lucifer, Ave Satan, Ave Lucifer. If you know, you know. If you know, you know. This is Agitators Anonymous. I am Alan Averill. Welcome to episode 200 and something or other. Who knows? Who can tell where we are exactly on the timeline? But anyway, if you know, you know. When I was in the USA, the US and a couple of weeks ago, Kai from Archgoat and myself were talking about, we're talking about growing old. We're talking about maturing, not as individuals, but as a band. And he said something that kind of stuck with me. He just looked at me and he says, I don't want to watch a band of young people. I don't want to watch young guys. We have experience. We need to show them how it's done. Now, if you've ever met the Archgoat guys, you'll know exactly how that was put across in a very quiet and stoic manner, as is their wont. And I just thought about that and I went, yeah, I guess so. He goes, leave it to young people to be full of energy and wild dreams. We have a mission, and that is to show them how it's done. Well, there you go. Because we'd been talking about our respective bands going for about 3 decades, and how perhaps you reach the top of the, I'm not going to say the mountain, but you reach the top of the climb from where you are, from where the band may plateau, may level out. Of course, you may drop in popularity. This happens to lots of bands. And you hope this plateau doesn't come too soon. Thankfully for neither of our bands, it seems to have. But he had a good point. And I suppose, when I really thought about it, it's true. That the old guys sometimes have to show these young guns how it's done. So, last weekend I saw Beherit. Speaking of, Ave Satan, Ave Lucifer, like I said. If you know, you know. One of the most iconic 30 seconds in the whole of black metal history. You either know or you don't. So last weekend something happened that I never quite thought I would witness. And that was Beherit pulling up in a van to play a festival while I happened to be standing in the backstage. I mean, of course, where else would I be standing? Or rather standing backstage adjacent on the little patch of grass beside the backstage at the most venerated, the most illuminating houses of the holy. If you've been there, you also know. If you haven't been there, well, maybe your name just wasn't on the list. But Beherit. All right. Beherit pulled up to the backstage. Now there is a sentence. I remember back in the day, trading for about a dozen VHS video cassettes. Shows from Dark Throne, Impel Nazarene, and of course Beherit. It seemed at the time about as close as we were ever going to get to actually seeing those bands. Now, of course, in the fullness of time, this turned out to not be true for the most part. I mean, none of us have still seen Dark Throne, but most of the bands who were on those videos, I have seen. I remember myself and Dara from Invictus Productions used to sit just watching tape after tape after tape. The kind of shows that you can find now on YouTube. I don't know, Dark Throne live in Lahti in Finland, 1992. The kind of thing, right, you know, these days you would watch a song or two and go, oh, pretty cool. But we would watch this for hours and hours. And, of course, on one of them was the famous Beherit show where they're outside a shopping centre in the street somewhere in Finland. They look like tiny little guys. I guess they're 16, 17, 18 perhaps, I don't know. But they're playing outside a shopping centre. And then one in a small venue. I can't remember the name of it, but it was somewhere in Finland. It was right before, I remember, a crazy show with Impel Nazarene where Mika appeared to be naked and covered in blood doing his best Gigi Allen impersonation with a huge wooden inverted cross. and came running out from the backstage with this inverted cross and promptly slipped over. I presume he was wearing cowboy boots at the time. Not great with grip, cowboy boots on a wooden stage covered in blood. There you go. There's a sentence you probably haven't heard in any other podcast today. But Beherit, live in 1992. Nuclear Holocausto Vengeance, looking exactly like you might remember. Totally iconic. Did I use that word already? And the bass player, wearing glasses and standing sideways, looking at the drummer, which perplexed me, I have to say. But he decided that day, I guess I'm not playing the game. What is the game? Black metal is the game I play. I wrote a letter or two to Beherit back in about 1992, I guess, for my fanzine of the same time, The Oath, of which I am really trying to get together all the old issues to make some sort of compendium. Sadly and tragically, they are kind of lost. All the original fanzines with all the original photos, all the original layouts that I made myself, they're sitting somewhere in a cardboard box in an attic in a house I used to live in many years ago. Sometimes it wakes me up in the middle of the night thinking about where is my original copy of The Oath 2, full of all the original photos of Catatonia, Beherit, Impel Nazarene, Unholy, of course, all these bands. Someday, maybe this year, I'll finally get my act together and release an Oath, The Oath it was called, compendium. Anyway, it's hard to overstate what an impact Beherit's image had back then. Of course, you know, the demos were kind of cool, I guess, Demonomancy, but I don't think you could have called them classic. They're not revered in the same way Blood on the Altar, the Blasphemy demo is, and rightfully so, considered an absolute classic. Beherit wasn't quite classic. And The Oath of Black Blood, when it came out, let's be honest, the cover kind of sold it. It's a cool record, don't get me wrong. And the Moyen Sea artwork. But buying it at the time, I remember being slightly even taken aback at the kind of confused mess it appeared to be. The legend was that it was pressed from a blank from an old cassette, and the band didn't want it to be released. It was more like a demo. I think there's another demo called At the Devil's Studio, which is much more like you would have imagined The Oath of Black Blood should have sounded. Yes, this podcast is kind of going to be about Beherit, but it's also going to be about the possibility of ruining reputations. It's about taking that step onto the stage, whether for the first time or after 30 years, and the thoughts therein that might be. Let's get to it. Before we get there, let me just say the podcast as ever is sponsored by Metal Blade Records. Follow the links below. Use the promo code AA2024 because that is allegedly the year that we are in, and you can get 10% off your order, especially good in North America. If you want to follow me on Patreon, go to patreon.com/Alan Averill. And there's all sorts of demos, discussions, extra podcasts, all that kind of thing over there. Anyway, The Oath of Black Blood. It's kind of true, the cover did kind of sell it. It was on Turbo Records, if I remember correctly, a label from Germany. I think they may have done Acheron Rites of the Black Mass, which is another incredible record from that same kind of era. But the legend was that it was pressed from a cassette tape. And it seemed to be a kind of confused mess, even by the standards, as I said, of the aforementioned Blasphemy or Nuclear Death or, bands like that. It just was kind of wild. Of course, I liked it and still do. But in reality, I think Beherit's the sound didn't quite crystallize until the dawn of Satan's Millennium 7-inch, which is quite the collector's item now. Put that into Discogs and it will most likely come up as a €300 7-inch or something. I might do a podcast about the insanity of a record, and especially t-shirt collecting, which has gone way out of order. It's kind of got crazy. There's a website called tshirtslayer.com, which has lots of trading of old shirts, and sometimes which is kind of cool to do. Every now and again, I do it. And I just saw, that's a very nice old Sadist t-shirt. I always wanted a Sadist Kill Team or First t-shirt, from like 88, 89. Sadist, Chemical Exposure, Illusions, and the Death to Posers demo. Some of the greatest most unhinged thrash, or whatever you want to say, death thrash that there is. I think it's even better than Merciless The Awakening. Bum, bum, bum. And somebody wanted, I think, €300 for a Sadist t-shirt. I was like, you know what? Come on. Anyway, The Dawn of Satan's Millennium 7-inch was more like it. And then in one of those letters I got from Holocausto in 1992, there was the original Beherit promo 1992, which was, I think, the first 2 songs from Drawing Down the Moon. And when this came out, this was the album we had been waiting for, an absolute, genuine, an utter milestone in black metal. Like, quite literally nothing else. And somehow, if you don't know it, you need to go back and listen to it. And you need to go back and, dig this one out of the grave. It is an absolute milestone in black metal. But somehow, here I am, over 30 years later, standing on the side of a mountain in Austria, waiting for Beherit to come on. Yep, the hallowed ground, as I said, of Houses of the Holy. Of course, people wax lyrical about the event, and sure, people can scoff, going, oh, it's all elitists up there in the mountain, but maybe that was always the point, wasn't it? Maybe that was always the point of black metal. I certainly believe so. It can't really be all that illuminating, can it? Well, yeah, it can, but I'll get to that later. But quite a large portion of the day had been spent discussing with some black metal luminaries, OGs, let's call them, original of the species, the dangers of returning to the stage after so many years, the possibility of tarnishing your legacy, or even taking to the stage at all after so many years. Beherit, let's not forget, like quite a few other people in that sort of after the initial flurry, that initial, storm of black metal in the early 90s, they retreated to making kind of, soundscape, sonicscape, electronic music. Again, I remember buying the album HV480, whatever, blah, 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 whatever it is. And this move was one of the most despised moments in all of black metal at the time. Few of us understood it. It felt like an utter betrayal of what Drawing Down the Moon represented. And listening back, it still doesn't hold much water for me. As a quite a smart segue, there's a song I think I remember called Fish on it. Well, anyway, look. However, it's all water under the bridge. See what I did there? Ah, yes. Anyway. But here they were, returning to the stage. And the conversations during the day that I was having with some other people, it seems that the best, or maybe the most informative lesson from our heavy metal history is, of course, Bathory. Now, people forget that, Bathory was like a pretty big band. Would I estimate it what the biggest selling Bathory record was? I would probably say it was Bloodfire Death or Hammer Heart. I read that by the time The Return had come out, the first album had sold 40,000 copies. And again, when Under the Sign of Black Mark had come out, The Return had sold 40 or plus more thousand records. Now, it's very hard to disseminate when you read back through, for example, take the liner notes of Blood on Ice. What is true, what isn't true? I collect Bathory interviews from the 80s. On my YouTube channel, actually, there is a Bathory interview from 1990, a radio interview. But trying to sort of dig your way through what is true and what is just fabrication can be quite difficult. But certainly, there's a moment where Bathory just couldn't do it live. I think he had the intentions of doing it in the 80s. And of course, he rehearsed in 1986 with Witch Hunter from Sodom to play, in order to try and play live. And you can see a bit in the video of One Road to Asabe what maybe a Bathory show would have looked like. And then Chernobyl happened, and Witch Hunter scarpered off home. And allegedly, according to a few people who used to be drinking buddies of Witch Hunter, there was a rehearsal album, an album that was made between him and Witch Hunter of songs that they wrote in the month or two that they were in Stockholm rehearsing. 9 Lakes of Fire, Descent to Hell, these are the names of the songs. The Fire Still Burns. In fact, you can read an interview with Quorthon in 1988 where he discusses a whole list of songs that have never seen the light of day, and I think sadly now never will see the light of day. But there's probably a moment where Quorthon, I suppose by the time they made Hammerheart, where it just became too daunting, too difficult to step up onto the stage. He seemingly had every intention of it, and I got some great Bathory stories one time when I sat down with Lee Fiedling from Candlemas. He told me that Bathory used to rehearse. There's many islands on the inlets in Stockholm, and the Forsberg family had a wood cabin, and it became Bathory's rehearsal room on one of these little islands, and they used to row out to it with their six-packs and sit and watch Bathory rehearse, and it was all pentagrams and leather. And I said, "Oh, have you any photos of this? Any recordings of this?" No, not my style. Well, so the intention was at some stage to play live, and then the songs got bigger and longer, and you could see how it might have been utterly daunting to try and approach them once you get to Hammerheart, and especially to sing. Now, of course, then you've got the whole of the 90s, and people I know who know or knew Quorthon said that he spent most of the end of the 90s sort of depressed and sort of sulking a bit at the fact that it wasn't 1987 or 89, and he wasn't flying around the world doing press trips and screwing groupies or whatever he was doing, and hanging out with Slayer backstage at World War III festival, or all this kind of stuff. And that he felt like black metal had kind of come along and sort of stolen his thunder a bit, which I suppose it did. But after Twilight of the Gods, he sort of only had himself to blame. I mean, Requiem is an utterly terrible album. Octagon is also a terrible album. And these albums like Nordland 1 or 2 seem like a last gasp. The guitar is kind of out of tune, the intonation is out of tune, but sort of moving in the right direction a little bit. But the story goes that Wacken, open air, this is the mythology. I guess all of these things are lost now. The truth is probably a bit lost, and there are some people who know more, some people who know less. I would say I'm sort of not quite in the middle, but maybe leaning into the I know a little bit more edge things. But there's going to be a book apparently. Maybe I'll discuss that at some other stage. Not written by me, of course, but by the Professor of High Spirits. You can go back and actually watch our YouTube interview. The Professor Black, I shall call him for the purposes of this podcast. Him and a few other people are making a book about Bathory, which should hopefully come out. I'm not sure when it's coming out, but hopefully it will reveal some of the secrets. But the mythology is that Wacken Open Air offered, I think, €100,000 or something, or €80,000 for Bathory to play. Now, I don't know how true this is, but the myth was that Edge of Sanity were going to be his backing band. And because Edge of Sanity were also on Black Mark Productions, and I suppose if anybody's going to be able to help you fix the soundscapes and the backing vocals and all that kind of stuff, it's got to be Dan Swano, right? You could picture it. You could picture Edge of Sanity with Quorthon out front, and then the mercurial Dan Swano maybe somewhere off stage or somewhere from the side, fixing all the and all that kind of stuff, and maybe adding a few keys. You could see that. Now, that was allegedly the organisation. That was allegedly what was supposed to happen. And then at the last moment, Quorthon kind of got cold feet and vetoed the whole thing. And you do wonder, now, of course, maybe the details of his death, I suppose, could it be something congenitive, something he was living with that was always ready, like a ticking time bomb to take his life, sadly, at such a young and early age. But you do wonder if maybe if he'd stepped on that stage, it could have given him some kind of new lease of life, brought him back in from the wilderness, and maybe then you could have had a couple of big festivals and, Bathory and stage show and flaming torches. You could see it. Eric von Watain doing the stage management, setting the mood properly. I mean, if anybody was going to be able to do that and interpret the whole thing, I mean, Eric would be perfect for that, of course. And you could see it, but sadly, of course, it never happened. And I think sadly, in a way, because it would have pissed me off in my 20s and 30s if Bathory had decided to play, and I didn't get to see it. But also, you kind of, oh well, then it's not meant to be played live. But at the same time, this is really up to the individual, up to the musician, up to the person who makes it, if they want to accept that challenge. Now, we're getting to the hub, getting to the nub of the conversation. Is it a hub or a nub? It could be both. So watching Beherit, getting back to where I started, you get the impression that, I got the impression watching Nuclear Holocausto Vengeance, that, I'm going to call him that instead of Marco, there's a lot more electro stuff involved, even by the time they were doing Drawing Down the Moon. And that was kind of where he'd wanted to go, because it looked like he'd grown in a black metal petri dish a version of himself to play the guitar from 1992. Now, I kind of felt a little bit when I heard Beherit was playing again and Marco wasn't Holocausto wasn't playing the guitar. I felt, for fuck's sake, it's not that iconic thing I wanted from 1992. But the guy playing the guitar looked exactly like him from 1992. While he stood at the side, kind of like a very evil satanic DJ, making some sound scapes and stuff alongside the music and doing a kind of shifted vocal. It worked. It absolutely worked. And when that famous intro started from Drawing Down the Moon, it was powerful. It was very powerful. It had weight. It had all of us old black metal luminaries just kind of side-eyeing each other going, holy fuck, they really mean it. They really do mean it. Holocausto prowling around the stage, and it seemed like after 30 years, the idea that you would pick Houses of the Holy as the comeback, it just seems so utterly perfect. Because if you know anything, there's the fire ceremony at the end of the Saturday evening, the blazing torches. It just seemed so absolutely perfect that after that, Beherit was going to play. But as a musician, what possessed them or him to come back? No, I didn't have that conversation with them, but that's what we spent a lot of the day talking about. Either you don't care at all and you're just going to go, fuck everyone, I want to do this for myself. I couldn't care less how, you think about it. Or, I couldn't give a fuck about letting you down, letting your memories down. These things you've been hauling around with you for 30 years. This is my stage. This is what I'm going to do with my music. As I said, having just seen the Cavalera brothers doing Morbid Visions, Bestial Devastation and some Schizophrenia songs the other week, I have to admit it was great. Now, a lot of the crowd didn't know what was going on. They were waiting for Chaos CD. I mean, look, isn't that always going to be the way? I think even in 1990 or 1992, most of the people going to a Sepultura show don't know Necromancer from Bestial Devastation. But the brothers wrote the songs. It sounded great. It's up to them what they do with them. Now, and then it was full of energy. So, in the same way, it's up to Holocausto to do what he wants with those songs. It's just your memories. It's your baggage that you're dragging with you to watch at the stage. Should you leave it behind? Well, that's what we've been talking about all day. But there is a risk. You're risking your own reputation. You're risking tarnishing the mythology. And for all bands who don't play live, I think it's somewhere there's a little devil on the shoulder going, well, wouldn't you mind? That would flatter your ego a little bit to do it. Don't you think you wouldn't mind a little slice of that black metal pie, whatever you want to say? There's a moment, I think, though, where you cross the Rubicon, and just like Quorthon did, I guess, with Bathory, and you go, can you really come back from that? Yet, isn't it a challenge? And fundamentally what black metal perhaps should be, the will to challenge yourself. But think about it. Think about it. Do you want to see Deathspell Omega or, for example, Abigor live? Or think of all the other bands, Burzum or whatever. Think of all those. Do you want to see that live? These bands have built up a reputation in the shadows. To then step out of them, it risks quite a lot. It can destroy reputations, or at least harm them. I mean, of course, you take this, take the situation we're talking about. Now, Beherit is pretty primitive. It's pretty atavistic primal music. But you take a more complex band and that first gig and you've got a 15-20 minute changeover. These are just the really boring, mundane things that you have to cope with. And all of a sudden you go, oh fuck, I haven't put a pedal, a battery in the active in the guitar. And you're like, does anybody have a 9-volt battery? No. Fuck. The lead doesn't work. The pedal doesn't work. The amp head dies. If you're going to come out of the shadows with this intense show, or something that you're going to have to haul in some element of the other, whether it's going to be visuals, whether it's going to be something together. For example, the band Bellwitch, I spoke about on the podcast before. Great doom band, reminds me a bit of Thurgathon, Streams from the Heavens, which is I think the ultimate funeral doom record. But I saw them without their visuals and it made no sense. I saw them with the visuals and I was like, oh, okay, this is incredible. This makes a lot of sense. So for a band, let's say, for example, Despot Omega, you want something of the other. If they ever tried to play live, you want some visuals, you want something or other. But what about that moment when you're setting up and you go, hey, the camera doesn't work, or all the mundane, boring bullshit things? As someone who's played, I don't know, I'm deaf enough to have played probably 1,800 gigs, 1,600 gigs that you have to cope with. All of a sudden that thing where, somebody says, hey, Alan, the in-ears don't work, the monitors don't work, you're just going to have to sing, put some fucking tissue in your ears and just sing from muscle memory, you're not going to hear a thing. Or you just cope with, like it happened to us at Houses of the Holy, with Primordial, we played a big long set and something went down with electricity in one of the amps. And Simon just came out from the drum kit, he took a little bit of coaxing, but once I did it, and he sang. He sat on a stool and he sang some old Irish traditional songs to the audience for 10 or 15 minutes. It was absolutely beautiful. It was absolutely an incredible moment. And, testament to the power of the man's voice. 500 people just stood in absolute silence and listened to him sing. He's an incredible singer, I may add. That's how you cope. But if you stepped out of the shadows with this band with a full reputation formed in them, there is a risk that you destroy that. A lot to think about there. I mean, and do you want to in the first place? Do you accept the challenge? Do you decide, no, this is not the right environment for this? Of course, I've sat there in the backstage, in a Porto cabin, or whatever you want to call it, at some awful soulless festival, waiting for the 6:20 afternoon slot to 7 p.m. It's trying to squeeze Primordial songs into 40 minutes, somewhere between Cataclysm and Insiferum. Wondering what the fuck we're doing there. Or, stuck between Avenged Sevenfold and something else much further away. Talking to the drummer of Avenged Sevenfold about, Tooth and Nail by Dokken, which was quite cool. But anyway, and we're wondering, what are we doing here? Because Primordial is not my living. Sure, it's an addendum for all of us, but my living, it is not. So either you want to be on the stage or not. It's a case of what appeals to your character, to the ego, to what you want to achieve with the music. For me, Primordial hasn't been an exclusive band. Sure, we're not that popular, popular enough, clinging on to the middle ground of the mainstream here and there. Maybe those days are even a bit behind us, who knows? None of which was intentional. We didn't write Empire Falls to catapult us into this arena. It all happened by accident, really. But you either want to be on the stage or not. And there really is nothing like it in the world, I have to add. It's, of course, an exercise in some kind of power. Raising your hand and extolling thousands of people to do the same thing in unison. That's quite the powerful motif. Wait, that sounds a bit like... Well, anyway. But we always felt we were the antidote to the nonsense, to the fantasy. This is a real band singing about real things, and it was important. It had a form of living history to it. It had weight. It had some weight to it. So if you feel you're on some sort of crusade, on a mission, to go out there and stand on a stage and go, this is the Coffin Ships, this is a piece of Irish living history, here is our tragedy, deal with it. That was kind of our mission statement. Of course, if you want your band to, as I said, stay, in the shadows, to be reclusive, more power to you, if that's that's the path. But standing there watching Beherit return, as I said, with some black metal luminaries who we'd spent the day discussing this with, there's got to be a little itch that you want to know if you could scratch, to take it back to the stage. And so we're waiting for Beherit's intro, and it's clear once they start, pardon my French, they're going to fucking rule. It has weight, it has primacy, it has aggression, it sounds fucking heavy. And why not? Because you're given a short roll of the dice before it's all over, and you never know when it is over. To go back to the stage, to go back to having an experience before it's too late to do so. And the beauty and the primacy of the fire ceremony that happened before Beherit. The bass player of Beherit was walking behind me with his own torch. And afterwards we came back and he was just, like, what the fuck just happened? There you go. There's a life experience just rolling out in front of you. To get out of the rehearsal room, to travel before we can't. And before you're too old to not have this life experience. And we go back to the beginning of the conversation, to standing there on a stage, with experience under your belt, with experiences under your belt, life experiences under your belt. Of course, there are old bands who do this and it falls flat on its face. Sometimes especially old heavy metal bands, who haven't the evil that Beherit does to lean back into. Who try and dress as they did in 83 or 93, which is even more embarrassing, no doubt. But you either know what you mean to fans and you get it, or you don't. But Beherit, they know. The songs are updated for, as I said, Holocausto to not have to play the guitar, which admittedly irked me as I had a visual in my head of how it should be. But you know what? You need to drop that baggage somewhere on the hill. My bag of memories remains. And like I said, he prowls a stage like a kind of satanic DJ. But it works. But they had not, it would seem, crossed that Rubicon yet. And the margins are fine. You walk a fine line when you return like this. Because how easily our icons are ruined and how easily our memories are altered. But, my friends, Agitators Anonymous episode, who knows? Ave Satan, Ave Lucifer. Over and out.